So this this talk is about analytics for the public service, and it's an area that I've been interested in for quite a long time. And we've been coming through some very bad times in terms of banking collapse and the state finance collapse and political collapse, and I've been looking at it for, as I said, for quite a long time, and really quite concerned about trying to analyse what are the reasons for it so we can fix it. And I think that it would be fair to say that we've had changes in government, but not much change in what politicians are doing. And we presumably have had some changes in civil servants and public servants generally, but not much change in what they've been doing. And the point I would be making generally about this is, we do analytics. What is analytics? It's a good analysis, and we're taking a technical approach to good analysis. And what it seems to me is that the analysis about the public services is what has been wrong. Maybe we would have thought initially that, well, this is an Irish problem, but actually I think it's much more than an Irish problem. It's a general problem. So, okay, this is the most complicated slide in the sense that there's so much material in it. So just starting at the top left, you can see the issue to do with reforming the public service. The culture, where does it come from? It comes from 19th century Britain, who were the ones who, when they were developing their empire. And so any biases that are there that are built into the cultural practices are built into the legislation really related to setting up an empire which was going to run places like India, and so you maximize the amount of control that you could have. And so if you look across the top, the three different aspects to do with what I call extroverted developing, relating to the outside world and so on. You've got the individual and the role of the individual in the public service, in the civil service, in solving problems. And as I would see it, the individual doesn't really play a big role. You've got the odd person at government or central bank or banking regulator or a minister, and so a certain number of people have such roles. The next one is the representative, or the context, the people who link you to context, and generally they would be politicians. But even in the context of the public sector, particularly the local government area, actually the politicians have very little influence. They certainly have hardly any control. It's the executives in the local authorities are the ones who have the power, the executive power. So where is it? Where is the power? It's corporate. And you see in the slide there, it said there were about 400 semi-state bodies in Ireland. I think a recent count says it's about 500. Nobody's really certain how many, because whenever there's a problem, what people did was they tended to just set up another one. And we'll come to this later, but the issues about having authority in multiple different places means that it's very hard to get anything done. So what's the effect of all of this? If you now look at the stages, and these are 9 stages of analysing what you want to do. You've got a project or a problem or whatever it is you want to do, which has a public sector aspect. You then want to design a solution, then you want to implement it. Now, this is a structure. So I talk about bones, flesh and skin. So the bones of the structure, whether it fleshes out as levels of activity, physical, political, economic, social, cultural, emotional, or whether it is stages of solving a problem, they follow the same structure. So how does the structure operate within the public service? And how should it operate? Basically, if you look at the sequence of things, you should survey what you want. So individuals say, I think this is needed. We need something for nursing or a new medical specialism or something like that. And then, people carry out a study. Maybe it's put forward by a political process. And then you define what you can do. And so it's an economic thing, so you have to give it to the state to work out, well, what can we afford and stuff like that. Now, what should happen then is you then select what is the best way to go? So you design your solution in broad terms as to what would fit what would the state can afford, or the government department can afford, or local authority could afford, or anybody could afford. And so you get the right fit. The next thing is you then do a design, and you're sort of learning about how best could you do this. So you're filling in the gaps, and you're looking for help in various different areas. I mean, for instance, when we wanted to design a children's hospital, okay, after about, I think it was 5 or 8 years, they then put the design to Portpanola, and somebody with an objection said it's too high. Now, what was wrong there? They had failed to include somebody from Portpanola at the very start of the thing 5 or 8 years earlier. So they didn't really bring in the representative interests of others who might have some concern or involvement in it. It was just not done. After that, what you do, you then go to the acquisition stage, where you get some expert, whether it's architects or medical or engineering, whatever it is, and you bring in the experts who can put something together. So if you think of things like the PPARs, which is a pay-related system for the whole public sector, they actually didn't give it to any experts or train experts within the public service to do it. Or even take, for instance, like the voting machines. They bought the voting machines, but they didn't actually check out the software first. So no experts were involved. But that's what they should have done. Once you've done that, you then hand it on to be implemented, which means that you have experts who construct it, and then you deliver it to your end users, and then you maintain and realize it. Now, what's the reality that happens? Okay, individuals and needs produce some kind of ideas about what we need. There's a survey, and then we do a study, and the political people maybe back it, and then it goes to the state, and they work out, yeah, this could be done. And then they just go and do it. They select a solution, and then they just finish it. So, in fact, there's no design. There's no filling. There's no learning process. There's no trusting experts to build a thing, to acquire what is necessary. No finding the right solution. Just pick a solution. So what we're beginning to see is that you have some individual who's stuck in a room who's been told, you have to do this, and there's nobody's going to help you, and so do it yourself, and don't ask anybody because nobody knows how to help you. And so no proper construction, and definitely no delivery. So what I'm concerned about is in demonstrating, not just to prove this, but demonstrating what is missing and how we can fix it. And what we're talking about here is nomology, which is a study which incorporates two sides of things. Nomos, which is objective stuff like the economics, ergonomics, and so on, which is reflected by the circle at the bottom of the page on the left-hand side. And ology, as in psychology, sociology, anthropology, which is the slide we've just seen, the 3x3, which is up in the top left of the slide. You can see that there. Now, what nomology indicates is that actually there are 4 layers. So the subjective ones, committing and convincing, are on the top, and then within it, the adjusting others, adjusting self. And this is where the problems that are just shown with regards to a large part of the subjective cycle not being done, we can actually see why it's not being done and where the problem's coming from. But in essence, just to go over it, at the top row of the 3x3, the analysis, you talk about you commit yourself, and then you convince others, and then you develop within the world of your problem or your project or whatever it is. So that's the top row. Then after you've done that, then the bottom one is where you do the design. And the design, if you're flipping from the top developing world to the bottom adjusting world, this is stage 3 to stage 4, and then adjusting others, the actual design of the project fitting into others, and then adjusting self, it's the acquisition of what you need. So the last phase Remember, the top is analysis, the bottom is design, and the implementation is this one here. So you're adjusting self, it's you're constructing, adjusting world and adjusting others, which is the delivery, and then you go back up into completing it. So the parts that have been a problem have been in the adjusting and the adapting areas. Remember, the adapting one is an interesting one because this is adapting where some things have been going wrong. So now let's look at the objective structure, the adjusting and adapting structure, and see how that works within the context of the public service. Now, in homology, we have bones, which are the structures that you see, and then you've got flesh, and then you've got skin. The skin are the words and the constructs that we use. So you can see here you've got generic ones, proposition, perception, pull and push, the 4 quadrants, and within that, pounds and procedures and so on. These are generic words, but in the context of the public service, you've got things like responsibility and accountability and stuff like that. Those are the appropriate words within the public service, or if you like to call it the civil service. So, as you see across the top, all of these should balance each other in a mutually supporting balanced package. Now, what is the reality? The reality is officials mainly deal with responsibility. This is my responsibility. What are you responsible for? I'm responsible for that. I deal with such and such. And occasionally, especially now that things have been going wrong for quite a long time, you'll see the word accountability coming up. Who's accountable for that? And somebody better be made accountable. Now, it's not really a good situation because we're actually talking about 8 things, and mainly the language and the talk that comes from the public service is about these top 2, mainly responsibility and sometimes accountability. So what is the problem within the structure? If you see the top within the structure there, state business, and the bottom is public service, so much of what happens in the public service is done as state business. This is state business, you can't interfere with that. No, it has nothing to do with you. And even when the former Taoiseach was questioning the banks and the economy and the borrowing and stuff like that, and he was told, Taoiseach, you don't have to worry about this, it's nothing to do with you, because this is being dealt with by the banks and the central bank or the bank regulator or whatever it was. So the imbalance, the great imbalance is too much is hidden away as state business and not enough as public service. And that's really the main point. Now, so let's look at this into some detail. Okay, at the top you've got too much people taking responsibility, and it's not that people who are in the civil service at a senior level or the public service are bad people in some sort of way. They're wonderful people to take responsibility. The problem is that they take too much responsibility and they haven't been assisted to move out of that. Now, what homology does, and again, if you like, the bones, the structures you see, the skin are the words, but the flesh is the connection between these. Now, so the flesh here is the connections between these. You've got these 2 words, responsibility and accountability, but they're actually 2 words out of 4. And if you have somebody's responsibility, yes, you want to make them accountable, but you can't make people accountable for something if you haven't given them authority. So you can see there in the bottom left the word authority. Those are 3 out of 4. And I want you to think in terms of a jigsaw puzzle as the bits, but I want you now to think in terms of like cogs in a machine. So here we've got 3 cogs in a machine that work together. There's one more, because remember there's all balance, 2, 4, 8. And the 4th one of these is you can't have responsibility, accountability and authority without transparency. Because if some are seen to be doing it and some are not seen to be doing it, then it's just not going to work. So these are 4 that are necessary. And of course, attempts have been made to do something about this, but not successful. Now, any further? Well, actually, For each of these four, these are about using your position. I have a position of responsibility, position of accountability, and so on. Each of them, there is an equivalent or corresponding personal activity. If you want accountability, you must give people the ability to enforce the job that they have, for which they're going to be held accountable. So you can't have accountability without enforcement. The next one is authority. We're talking about people having authority within the public service, not in a vague sort of way where they're buried within offices or connected with each other. And so people who have authority, there needs to be engagement. So if they have an authority under somebody to do something, or over somebody, or jointly with others, there needs to be engagement so as to make that authority work. If you're going to have transparency, already public servants are quite discouraged, quite exposed, and really feel that they want to hide away. They need to be encouraged. So somebody is given a job, but then they're told everybody will be able to see what you do. Well, you're not going to choose that job if you're going to be criticized all the time, so you need to be encouraged. And the last of these is, if somebody is going to be given responsibility for something, the personal aspect is that they should be empowered. They should be given all that they need so as to be able to carry out the responsibility. That's not necessarily a big budget, because the budgets are not necessarily the thing, but if they have difficulties, that they're empowered to go and get help, to go and talk to people and so on. So these are all the things that are missing. Now, if there's a problem, as often happens, and this is usually, as we see, as I said earlier, the implementation is about adapting. So we need to adapt, which means going around in an anti-clockwise way. So we build accountability by enforcement, we build authority by engagement, and so on. And so that's one way of doing it. But that's about implementation. But actually the problems of the public service are at a much earlier state. Because if you remember when I showed you the earlier slide, the stages 4, 5, 6, where 5 and 6 were not really done at all. There was no design and no acquisition. Actually, that's where the problem starts. Because there's no responsibility, there is excessive responsibility, but there's no empowerment. They don't actually get into that area. And the empowerment is that the civil servant or public servant should be empowered to go out and talk to anybody else that they need and to say, look, there's something wrong with this legislation, or we can't really design this hospital without talking to different people and so on. So if we summarize now in terms of what we have excessive responsibility, people going around in circles. We have attempts to bring in accountability, and then there were attempts to bring in transparency, except that they were using accounting methods, and both of those really sort of failed. But when you look at the balance of the four things, authority wasn't really addressed. There wasn't enough authority given to the appropriate people to be able to do things. There were efforts to bring in some sort of authority at that highest level, but what happened is whenever there was a conflict of authority, they just set up more and more semi-state bodies. I mean, realistically, we have about 500 of those semi-state bodies. Probably we don't need more than 2, the Army and the Gardaí. In other words, if everybody knows what they have authority for and over, and then they should be able to work within the structures that are there. So one is needed. If the biggest imbalance probably is the lack of personal engagement in and empowerment and encouragement and enforcement. So the personal aspects. If we were to emphasize which is needed, we need all of them, but probably the one that is needed most is empowerment, because it stops at responsibility and there's no sense of empowering people to go and reform. So that would be the main area that we should focus on, to empower our public service more And then they will bring in other people, more reviews, more design of things, and bring in more experts. So that's it, a summary of Analytics for the Public Service. Based on nomology, the covering laws of the mind, various different names for this, but essentially it's an overview of the common structures between the ology stuff, the psychological and sociological stuff, the subjective, the 3x3, and then the more objective ones, the economic type ones, and the balance 2, 4, 8, 16 structures. And if the East is more focused on those and the West is more focused on the subjective stuff, what we find is that the problems have actually arisen from the objective side. Objectively, we've got things out of balance, and this is the area that we need to do some reform in. Thank you.